Hello, and welcome to a Purpose-Driven Marriage podcast. We are Duane and Nadine Stewart, and we love any and all things marriage. You've tuned into the right place if you're looking for actionable, practical tips to help you overcome real-life obstacles common to real relationships. We're here to help you strive for a marriage as God has designed it and not as the world has defined it. Because why settle for a good marriage when you can have a great one? Babe, I'm so excited about today's topic. This is one that I have been waiting like a long time for us to be able to talk about because it's about interracial marriages, but not just that, but intercultural.
And that's
marriages.
us, right? I mean, goodness gracious. I mean, if you look at us and say they're an interracial and intercultural couple, then who is?
Then who is?
Yeah,
exactly. And so I'm really excited about that because I think, a lot of our listeners will be able to relate to the interracial part. But the part that I love is that whether people realize it or not, there's actually a whole lot more intercultural couples out there than we all realize. And we're going to dive into that. But I wanted to talk about that recent research that we just read.
Yeah, there was some research that, and people probably know this at this point, is that back in the 60s, intercultural and really interracial relationships were only 3%. They're only at 3%. But a recent study, 2020, said that 1 in 5 couples are interracial, which is a huge jump from 3% to 20%. But when you look out, it almost feels like it's higher than that. I feel like the number is way higher because I feel like I see a lot of interracial couples out there.
That's because we're in the West Coast.
That's probably
right. We're on the West Coast. And I think that, it's now accepted nationwide. I think that same research we were talking about how the acceptance rating for interracial marriages is up to 94%, right? But with 97% of those on the West Coast
and the East Coast,
supporting it, right? And so when you look at that, it's not uncommon, just in our own neighborhoods, we see so many interracial relationships.
And when that research showed, which was really interesting, is that, what was it, 2035?
In 2045.
2045. Yeah. That interracial couples will be the majority instead of
it's going to be a majority minority population.
That's right.
I think is how they referred to it.
But what's coming?
Yeah, exactly. But what I'm so excited about, though, is the intercultural component, because I think that is where more of our listeners will be able to relate, right? Because I don't know how many of our listeners or what percentage would consider themselves in an interracial marriage, but I would be willing to bet that when we define what those two mean, or the difference between an interracial marriage and an intercultural marriage, people will be able to listen to that and say, oh my gosh, they're talking about me.
That's right.
Yeah, they're talking about us, right? Because an interracial relationship, right? An interracial marriage is really, a marriage involving spouses that are of different races or ethnicities. Whereas an intercultural marriage is one where, when you think about it, your culture is the community from which you come from. Right. And it shapes your beliefs. It shapes your tradition, your faith, your religious beliefs. And it is really what you show up in your relationship with.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you look at it that way, there are, a lot more people in intercultural marriages than we probably realize, because what was it? We were talking about how just because you're in an interracial marriage doesn't necessarily mean you're in an intercultural marriage. And just because you are in an intercultural marriage, this is a tongue twister, does not necessarily mean that you are in an interracial marriage.
That's right. They're not mutually exclusive.
Yes. But there are, many of us like you and I that find ourselves being in both.
Yeah.
Right.
So let's think about that. So examples would be, you were born, and this is true, right?
Yeah.
You were born of a bigger family, right?
Yeah. My family, I have a huge family.
A bunch of siblings and aunts, uncles, nephews. My family's smaller. So big family, smaller family. One spouse is from a family that is, well-to-do, they're wealthy family, and another might not have had as much when they were growing up. Maybe what other
but even with that example of the socioeconomic status, right? You don't have to be in different races to experience that, because you could have two people of the exact same race marrying into each other's families, but one comes from a more, affluent background, and then others were, like they were barely putting food on the table.
Yeah.
Right. And so, we joked around about like those people that were born and raised and, spent their whole life, their whole, childhood in the Northwest, for example, in the Seattle area, and then they marry someone from Mississippi.
Yep. Yeah. And
right. Those are
and
two
nobody
different
thinks
cultures.
about that. Nobody thinks about, we didn't even really think about it until we started meeting couples that were from those, from different parts of the country. And they were like, well, shoot, these are things that we dealt with. I'm like, wow, you know what? You're right. That is totally intercultural, right?
Yeah. I mean, you take two people from different religions, right? Like I have a couple that I had worked with. I did their premarital counseling where she's in a Caucasian family. So she's Caucasian, grew up in a Christian home, and her husband is multi-ethnic, right? And grew up in a Muslim home. Right. And so that in itself, so not only are we looking at an interracial marriage, but we're also looking at differences in culture. So they could also be defined as being intercultural.
Yeah. I mean,
right.
There's so many different things that you can think about now. I mean, it could be like political views. I mean, that could be a big one.
Oh, that's a huge one. That's a huge one. Like people coming from, a highly conservative or a highly liberal background, or one that didn't even care about politics, right? Like politics played no role in their life.
Yeah.
Then they marry into a family that's completely opposite that again, you're combining two cultures.
Yeah, no doubt.
All right. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited to talk about this because I think more people can relate to it than they may have realized. So let's talk about then, what are some of the tips that we can give our listeners who are either in an interracial marriage or in an intercultural marriage, or whether or not they have a definition for, they simply feel like they are from two different worlds, right? Their upbringing, their background, where they came from are completely opposite each other. And now they're expected to make a life together.
Yeah. So I think number one, the absolute best thing to do is to kind of educate. You do the research yourself. Educate yourself on your spouse, on their family, on their traditions, and learning about their culture. But not just that, but be able to respect the fact that they're different, right? Isn't that so important?
Oh, I think that's huge. Learning about your spouse's, like where your spouse came from, right? And like, for example, we used the example earlier about, someone growing up in a wealthy family where they never had to worry about what they were going to eat that day.
Yeah.
Marrying someone who grew up in a family where, gosh, they had to work that day for the food that they were going to eat that night.
Yeah.
Right. It's not that person's fault. Right. And so, but the thing is, we tend to show up with the little quirks that we have based on where we came from.
Yeah.
So this, that background could absolutely help shape who we become. You've got the spender and the saver, right? Like finances is always a huge issue in a lot of relationships. It's one of the top 5 reasons that couples fight, right? It's due to finances. Now, when you really dig deep into the root reasons for why people show up, in terms of their finances in their marriage, oftentimes it's because of how they're brought up. Yeah, what they had or what they didn't have growing up. And so you may have the one who's terrified of spending any money because they never had any to spend when they were younger, and they don't want to find themselves
save
exactly,
because they never had it before.
Exactly. Or they may show up opposite. They're like, oh my gosh, I never had anything growing up, and so when I can afford it, when I've got a job, I'm just going to buy anything and everything to my heart's desire because I never had a chance to do that. Right.
And the saying opposites attract. I think God put couples together because of the fact that they're different, and somebody's strength could be the other person's weakness.
Yeah.
And because of those things, because you're now married and the two have become one, the person's weakness can become a strength because of the fact that they're allowing that the other spouse to influence them in that positive way, bring them more towards the middle, which might lead them more towards developing some of the skills and some of the abilities that may have been underdeveloped because of the challenges that they've had in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. But in order to do that, like the educating oneself really is super important. Like really trying to understand where are they coming from with this? Like what are the root cause, right? Root issues, the contributing factor that is causing them to be this way. And then respecting the fact that that's where they came from, not necessarily accepting, right? So there's a big difference. Respecting versus accepting, because there's just some bad behavior.
Right. So I'll tell you a fun one, because I know that everybody knows in the Filipino family that food is a big deal, right? So for me, of course, we ate, my family cooked, and it was an awesome thing. But when I went to your house for the first time, it was an eye opener, because the first thing your mom did was put a plate of food in my face. And at first I was like, I'm not hungry. You know what I mean? Or she would tell you to come over to me while I was sitting down and be like, oh yeah, feed your husband, that type of stuff. And you start to realize that in the Filipino culture and a lot of Asian cultures in general, that hospitality is given through food. Like if you're not feeding someone, you're not really taking care of them. And that's something that's really important. And it's almost an insult to that person if you don't eat, right? So for me, I had to really learn and understand, okay, I get it. I know why she's doing this. Even if I'm not hungry, I'm like, I'll eat something. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of that. So, and you came to love it because you know that there's pleasure in what they're doing by serving you. And so you're in the same way you're being blessed, you're blessing the other person, because you're accepting their offering.
Well, I love that, because what you did was you educated yourself, right? In my culture. And then you respected the fact that this is how my mom was always going to show up for you. But that actually takes us to number 2, adjusting and adapting, right? So you recognize that this is how our culture is. And so you made some adjustments to maybe how you showed up and adapted to the situation. So I remember, babe, you would make sure that anytime we'd go to my mom's house, to my parents' house, you would eat.
Yep. That's true. It's true, because I knew that that's one thing that your mom did is she planned. She was like, okay, I know that they're coming. I know your husband is somebody that loves to eat. So she already had like my favorite thing. She would have a steak. And by the way, she adapted too, because she had a steak for me after a certain point, instead of whatever other Filipino dish that she would typically make, because she knew I love steak. So she adapted to that, and she was able she wanted to provide that for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And as point number 2, or tip number 2, adjusting and adapting to one another's culture, right? And so recognizing that it may not be the way that you've done it. Like we just recently celebrated Christmas and Thanksgiving before that. And the way that you may have grown up celebrating Christmas or the holidays might have been one way. And then you marry into a family that celebrates it completely differently.
I got one.
What is it? You've got all the examples.
When we and I grew up, and this is just our family, we definitely celebrated Christmas. But from our perspective, Christmas was basically started a week before Christmas. So the lights on the house went up a week before Christmas. The Christmas tree went up in our house probably about a week and a half before Christmas, the lights and everything, just because, hey, my dad was like, it's cheaper when you get closer to Christmas. Plus in California, you don't have a lot of Christmas tree stands and stuff like that, especially back in that day. Now, of course you do, as opposed to now, where my wife, and this I think was tradition with you even before, is the day after Christmas, the day after Thanksgiving, Christmas stuff goes up.
But babe, we compromise though, because in the Philippine culture, the Christmas tree goes up like in September.
That is true.
It goes up before Halloween. And so the fact that I am willing to wait until seriously, immediately the day after Thanksgiving, like we put away the dishes from Thanksgiving dinner and the Christmas decorations are coming out.
If we could do Black Friday Christmas shopping or Christmas tree shopping, you would do it for sure.
I would absolutely do it. I would
like,
absolutely
that
do it.
moment. But that's what it's all about. It's about assimilating, it's about compromising, it's about embracing what the joys that come from just learning a new culture. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's awesome. And I've even learned a little Tagalog too. So
Yeah, you have.
mhm,
You're, embracing my culture. Now, mind you guys, we've been together going on 29
29
years.
years.
Actually,
Yeah,
this month.
yeah.
Yes, January.
Mhm.
29 years and we've been married.
23
It'll be 24
next
in
year.
March.
Yeah,
Yeah,
March.
in
Yeah.
March.
Mhm,
So anyways, and we're still adapting
mhm,
and making adjustments,
mhm.
and it's like a dance,
Yeah,
right? It's like a dance. And so you kind of make room for each other on the dance floor so you're
right.
not stepping on each other's toes,
Mhm.
and you look beautiful together. Your movements kind of sync up with one another.
Yeah.
And so that's how we look at marriage. But tip
And the
number
last one.
3,
Mhm.
is discuss the positives and the negatives and then choose what will work for you in your relationship. Now, ideally, this is something that you should discuss
Yeah.
before you even get married, right? Like ideally, these are things that are part of your conversations when you're still dating, you're still
Yes.
getting to know each other, or early on in your relationship. There's that saying, when's the best time to work on your marriage? And that's yesterday,
Right.
right? But the
Mhm.
second best day to work on your marriage
Is
is
now.
today,
Mhm.
right now.
Right.
And so discussing the positives and the negatives and then choosing what works for you guys. Because I mean, ultimately, you guys both came from a family, right? A family of origin.
Mhm.
But now you're creating your own family
Right.
that your children, if you have kids, will originate from.
Right.
Right. And so you guys get to choose the things that you both enjoyed, that you both liked from each of your families,
Yeah.
and let go of those that didn't serve you.
Yeah. I think we all have a certain bit of that goes through our mind, especially
Mhm.
when it comes to parenting. Like, oh yeah, well, I really love that when my mom and my dad did this, but I really did not like when they did that. I'm going to take this and I'm going to leave that. Right. So it's kind of the same thing with cultural. We take the things that we really feel is going to build and edify our family, and then the things that we don't subscribe to, it's like, yeah, maybe we could do without that. But from the Filipino side, I really loved the fact that you value family. And it's
Yeah.
not like other cultures don't value family, but it's very, very obvious. Even people that aren't part of the family, they're called family. That was one of the biggest things that I was like, okay, so everybody that walked in the door was like auntie and uncle, auntie and uncle. I'm like, wait, so that's your uncle? She's like, well, not really. They're a family friend, what I mean? But they're family. You call them that. And I thought to myself, that's cool. I really like that. So in our family now, that's what we do. We call aunties and uncles
Yeah.
that aren't really even our aunties and
Yeah.
uncles
We're
or
not
family,
related
because
to
they're
them.
just close. They're just close to our family, and I just love it.
Yeah, one of the things that was always really important to us growing up was showing respect to anyone that's older than us, really, right? Like our not necessarily just our elders like the grandparents, but anyone whose age is older than us. And
Mhm.
so there are terminologies in the Philippines or in the Philippine culture that are not present in the US culture or in the American culture, like, labeling an older sibling. It's kuya is
Kuya.
older brother and ate
Yeah.
is older sister. And you refer to them as that and not simply by their first name.
Right.
And so I call my older sister ate,
Ate.
and I call my older brother
Mhm.
kuya, even
Mhm.
though they're Teresa and Sam.
Yeah.
And so they
I
have
need to have
names.
my sister needs to call me Kuya.
Exactly.
Kuya
Yeah,
Duane.
you need to be called kuya.
Mhm.
But one of the things that we brought into our marriage was like we never called each other's parents by their first name.
Yeah.
And that was just not to say there's anything wrong with that, right?
Mhm.
Like there's the whole point of this is saying that, every culture is different, and it's not even just the country that you're from or the country that your ancestors are from, but more so the culture that you built within the family that you came from.
Right.
And so in our culture, we don't call each other's parents by their first names.
Right.
Right. That's something that we learned very early on. And we used to call each other's parents Mr. or Mrs. whatever. But then when we got married, it's mom and dad.
Yeah.
Mom and dad, no matter if they're my parents or Duane's parents, they're mom and dad to us.
I always had a challenge with that. Not always. In the beginning, I definitely had a challenge with that because I was like, okay, so I'm supposed to call you mom and dad, like how, and so once you kind of get used to it, I don't have a problem. I didn't have a problem at all, especially when my parents weren't there.
Yeah.
Like I'll call your mom and dad, mom and dad. But then when my parents were there, I thought it was confusing. Because you say, hey, mom, and then two people turn around and be like, okay, well, maybe I need to change that up a little bit. But that just promotes the whole family atmosphere, right? The attitude is, hey, I'm married into this family. You are my mother now. You birthed my wife. And you were the dad to my wife, so now you're my dad and you're my mom, and we're all family. And that's really what we're trying to say, is that culturally, whether you are a multicultural or a multiracial couple, it's really about adopting the culture and embracing your spouse and where they came from, and understanding that is going to lead to just a much more fruitful and happy and just enjoyable marriage.
Yeah, absolutely. And understanding that also allows you to decide as a couple what the two of you will bring into your relationship. It allows you to know how to set the boundaries that you will establish around your own marriage, around your own family, the positive things that you want to bring into it and the negative that you want to keep out. Right. So, whether it's an interracial marriage or an intercultural marriage or a little bit of the two or none of the above, but hey, you guys still feel like you're from different worlds, right? 3 tips that we have for you today is number 1, educate yourself and your family about each other's culture, about each other's background, where you came from, and then be willing to adjust and adapt to one another's culture, right? As you learn it, like adapt to it and then make some adjustments that will work for you and your spouse. And then number 3, and I think this is probably the most important because it does involve communication, is discussing the positives and the negatives and what you want to bring into your own family, right? Your own relationship as you create your own family's culture. So we hope you guys enjoyed this episode and bring you closer to having that purpose-driven marriage. If you haven't yet, go ahead and subscribe to our podcast. We have podcasts coming out every single Tuesday. Once a week, we're going to be rolling out a new episode. We hope you'll stay tuned. Feel free to share with others about us. All right. Have a great day.
See you next time.